Chapter 1. The Playground of Ashes. The first thing I noticed wasn't the sirens. It was the ash. It clung to the swings like a forgotten child's handprint, gray smudges pressed into chipped paint that had once been yellow but now looked like bruised sunlight. It settled into the cracks of the basketball court, powdered over the hopscotch squares, and gathered in soft piles near the fence, as though the schoolyard itself had tried to breathe and choked on the smoke. Even the air carried it, sharp, bitter, different from the wood smoke that curled sweetly from Mama's stove at night. This smoke didn't make you hungry. It made you remember. I sat on the cracked bench where weeds grew up through the cement, my notebook balanced on my knees. Around me, kids ran and shouted as if the world hadn't shifted overnight. Someone kicked a ball too hard, and it rolled through the ash, leaving a streak like a scar. Laughter echoed, high and careless. Maybe for them, nothing had changed. Maybe they could pretend the flames hadn't eaten at the city only yesterday. But I couldn't. Not when every step stirred up little ghosts of gray that landed on my shoes like warnings. I pressed my pencil to the paper, writing one line before. The words tangled themselves in my throat and had to escape through the page instead. The world pretends it is normal. The ash knows the truth. I stared at the sentence until it blurred, the letters running together, dark smudges like the soot staining the swing set. For a moment, I thought of tearing the page out, crumpling it into my fist, hiding it the way my family hid everything. But instead, I let it stay. Marisol dropped down beside me, her braid swinging across her shoulder. She squinted at the notebook. "You're writing again," she said, almost like an accusation. I closed the cover before she could peek. "It's nothing." "Lucia, you always say that, but it never looks like nothing." Her voice was light, but her eyes flicked toward the gate, the way all of us had been doing since this morning. The teachers told us to play, to act normal, but even they kept watching the entrance as if the shouts might spill into the schoolyard again. "You should stop staring so much," Marisol added, plucking a bit of ash from the hem of her skirt. "It makes people think you're strange." "Maybe I am strange," I murmured. "Maybe," she said, though there was no meanness in it. She just said it the way people in this town said everything, with that soft layer of silence pressed over the truth. A whistle blew, calling us back inside. Children groaned, gathered their things, left their games half-finished. I lingered, a moment longer on the bench. My hand tightened around the notebook. It was the only place I could tell the truth, and even then the truth came out crooked, like smoke twisting up into a sky that never cleared. I wrote another line before I stood. Ash is what the world leaves behind when it wants us to forget. And then I tucked the notebook against my chest as if it could shield me from the silence waiting inside. Inside the classroom, the walls were painted a tired green, peeling in spots where humidity had eaten at the corners. Our teacher, Senor Ramirez, tapped the board with his chalk, but half the class was still staring out the window toward the plaza. He pretended not to notice. That was what adults did here. Pretended. I sat near the back, notebook hidden beneath, my math book. Marisol sat beside me, her pencil tapping an uneven rhythm on the desk. Across the room, a boy leaned against his chair with that easy kind of slouch that made it seem like nothing could ever touch him. His name was Mateo Rios. Everyone knew the Rios family. Their bakery was a few streets down from the plaza, the smell of fresh bread spilling into the mornings like a kind of forgiveness. My mama sometimes sent me there for pan de bono or buñuelos, though she never liked to admit it. "We bake at home," she always said, but then she'd hand me a few coins anyway. The truth was, the Rios family carried rumors. Some said Mateo's uncle had been involved with groups out in the mountains years ago. Others said the family had paid for their safety in ways people didn't want to name. None of us kids knew for sure, but the whispers stuck, and Mateo carried them like an invisible shadow. Still, when he smiled, and he did often, it was the kind of smile that made people forget for a moment what they thought they knew. Even Now, across the room, his grin flashed as he doodled in the margin of his notebook instead of listening to Señor Ramirez. Something about his ease made me watch him longer than I meant to. My own family was nothing like his. My mama worked in a small shop that sold fabrics and thread, her hands always smelling of starch and cotton. My papa worked odd jobs, sometimes as a mechanic, sometimes helping at a cousin's farm. He came home tired and quiet, his silence heavier than his boots. He never talked about his own father, my abuelo, though sometimes I caught him staring. At the old photograph in the hallway, his jaw set hard like he was swallowing stones. That photograph was the only trace of my abuelo left in our house. A man in his 30s, dark hair parted neatly, standing in a pressed shirt beside a river. No one told me what happened to him. When I asked as a child, Mama said only, "He went away during the Troubles." Troubles. As if an entire war could be pressed into one small, tidy word. So I learned not to ask. Instead, I wrote, in my notebook, my abuelo was not a shadow or a silence. He was a character in stories where he survived, where he returned, where he whispered truths to me that no one else dared to say out loud. And maybe that was why I noticed the ash more than anyone else, because I knew it wasn't just smoke, it was memory. It was what the world left behind when it wanted us to forget. Mateo must have felt my eyes on him, because he turned suddenly and caught me staring. For a second, I froze. Then he tilted his head, curious, like he was trying to decide whether I was a puzzle worth solving. His grin softened into something quieter, and he raised his pencil in a mock salute before turning back to his doodles. My face burned. I ducked my head, pretending to focus on the equations on the board, though the numbers blurred until they looked like smoke trails themselves. I wanted to write, but if I took my notebook out again, Señor Ramirez would notice, and my parents would hear about it by the end of the day. Here, even secrets didn't stay quiet for long. At lunch, I slipped out to the far end of the yard, where the fence curled behind the old storage shed. Few kids came here, too many spiders, too much dust. For me, it was perfect. I pressed my notebook against my knees and began to write again. My abuelo once stood on the bank of a river, watching. The current drag branches past. He wondered if stories were like driftwood, some sinking, some floating on. He chose to leave his story behind, but I am here to catch it before it disappears. I paused, tapping the pencil against the page. Sometimes the words came like rain, tumbling too fast to hold. Other times they clung stubbornly like damp clothes. Today they trickled slowly, cautious. Maybe they knew someone was watching, because someone was. "Why do you always hide back here?" I looked up. Mateo leaned casually against the shed wall, one hand shoved in his pocket, the other holding a half-eaten piece of panda yuca. His shirt collar was unbuttoned and there was chalk dust smeared on his sleeve. "I don't hide," I said quickly, snapping the notebook shut. "You do." He smiled, crumbs clinging to the corner of his mouth. "But that's okay. Everyone hides from something." I narrowed my eyes. "And what do you hide from?" "Equations," he said without hesitation, tossing the last bite of bread into his mouth. He grinned again, and for some reason it made me laugh, a small sound that escaped before I could stop it. His expression shifted, though, as he glanced at the ash still clinging to the fence. Crazy, isn't it? How it's everywhere, like it wants us to remember yesterday, even when the teachers want us to forget. The words startled me. Most kids didn't say things like that out loud. They repeated what their parents said. It's best not to talk. It's just noise. Things will calm down. But Mateo said it like he believed the silence itself was the lie. "I notice it too," I admitted, my voice low. He tilted his head again, studying me. "You're Lucia, right? The girl who buys bread sometimes." Heat rushed to my cheeks. "Sometimes. Well," he said, pushing off the wall, "if you ever want to write about something real, you should come to the plaza. That's where things happen. Not back here. With that, he walked away, whistling a tune I half recognized from the radio. I stared after him, my notebook heavy in my lap. Write about something real. The words stung, because he didn't know how real my writing already was. He didn't know that every page was my way of clawing at a silence too thick to breathe through. When the bell rang, I tucked the notebook under my arm and followed the others inside, but all through the afternoon lessons, Mateo's words followed me like smoke. That night at home, Papa was quieter than usual, which meant he was carrying something heavy. He sat at the table, repairing a broken fan blade, though the pieces didn't seem to fit back together. Mama stirred a pot of lentils at the stove, her back stiff. The radio played softly, a commentator discussing the protests, though Mama turned the volume down every time the words violence or clashes came up. "May I be excused?" I asked, my plate half full. Mama shook her head. "Eat more first." Papa finally spoke. "How was school?" I hesitated. If I said fine, the conversation would end. If I said what I wanted, the ash is still on the playground and it feels like the earth is holding its breath, he would frown. In our